What's up, everybody? Michael Walsh here. So you might find out pretty quick from my voice and from my demeanor that I'm still quite sick, but I wanted to crank out a video for you guys anyways, and like and subscribe if you have not. But this video is in response to Mauricio Hufi's loss over the weekend, and it's sort of a video about the concept of levels. You know, because you'll hear people say there are levels to this game, and that's absolutely true. And we really saw it in terms of the grappling on Saturday. Because bear in mind, like, you can lose a fight via grappling and still be on the other person's level. In fact, you can be the better grappler and lose a fight via grappling. So a good example of that is Josh Barnett losing against Ben Rothwell. You know, Ben Rothwell catches him in that 10-finger guillotine that he likes, and Josh Barnett has to tap. Now, most people still consider Josh Barnett the better grappler, you know, better overall grappler, more accomplished grappler, better grappler at MMA, etc., but he got caught. And I say he got caught in much the way that we say that with strikes. So, you know, if you say someone catches someone with a punch, that's different than, like, systematically dismantling them with your striking. So compare Volkanovski versus Holloway 3. That was a true systematic dismantling, and it really showed there was this gulf between their abilities, that there was a level Volk was on and Max wasn't on it. Now compare that to Ben Rothwell versus Melvin Manhoef, where it's a brawl, Manhoef is beating up Lawler, Lawler's covering up, he's like looking at the floor, and boom, he swings back, catches him, knocks him out. That's a legit win, it's a legit knockout, and it's a knockout instead of a decision win, but that's catching a guy, and that's not showing the gulf in striking ability that Volkanovski showed that he had over Holloway. And same with grappling. Like, you can catch Josh Barnett in a guillotine like that, doesn't mean you're, you know, leagues above him in the grappling. An even better example is Fluffy Hernandez submitting Adolfo Vieira. You know, Vieira is a legit world champion in jiu-jitsu, and Fluffy Hernandez was a purple belt at the time, and that's why everyone made fun of it. But he didn't submit Vieira because he's the better grappler. He submitted him because he exhausted him first. And at that point, that's kind of like a club and sub, you know, where you knock someone down, and then while they're hurt, while they're on the ground, you like dive on their back and put the choke in. Like, and that's a legitimate way to win, and it shows you're a good MMA fighter who's good at, you know, taking opportunities. But that doesn't illustrate by itself that you're the better grappler, and certainly not that you're levels above them in terms of the grappling. But Mauricio Hufi's loss over the weekend did show there was a level between him and Benoit Saint-Denis. Because not only did Benoit win and submit him and use his grappling and get takedowns and stuff, but it was the kinds of control positions that he obtained, how he obtained them, and how long he held them. Like, that's what really showed the gap. Like in round one, where he's getting past the guard, getting inside control, just sliding the knee across, getting the mount, holding mount for a while. Like, that shouldn't be happening if you are both, like, good grapplers on similar levels. Like, if you train, you know. Like, if you do jiu-jitsu, you know. That shouldn't be that fucking easy. Okay? And that's a bad look for Hufi, because Saint-Denis is not the best grappler in the division. I mean, look at what Moicano did to him. And then look at what Islam did to Moicano. And granted, there's some caveats. Moicano took that on short notice, and he sort of got caught, but there was still things about the positional grappling and the takedowns leading up to getting caught that showed the gap between him and Islam. And excuse me. And it's not, and sure, Islam's no longer at lightweight, but he could come back. But it's not just Moicano you got to worry about. You know, look at Arman Tsarukyan, look at Paddy Pimblett. You know, he's old, but look at Charles Oliveira. Lower in the rankings and more realistic kind of future opponent for Hufi, look at Gamrot. You know, even Topuria, who Hufi was calling out, sure, that would probably be a striking match, so maybe the grappling wouldn't matter. But now that we know what we know about Hufi's grappling, Topuria, if he fucking felt like it, could just take his ass down and sub him. Like, he could absolutely do that. So this is a real bad look. And this sort of connects to the broader question of the fighting nerds and what their future prospects are. And I'm going to do some more videos down the road, you know, this week and next week, kind of giving my analysis of Silva versus Lopez, kind of what Silva's prospects are. And next week, after we get the aftermath of that, I'll do a video about the fighting nerds. And that's going to be more about like why we like certain fighters, because if you watch my channel, you know I'm a strong advocate for exciting fighters who are willing to go out on their shields, and I care more about that than I care about who's the best technician, who's pound for pound number one, who's the champ, all that kind of shit. I've been watching the sport a long fucking time. I've seen a lot of champions come and go. I've seen a lot of pound for pound rankings, get rearranged. That's not what makes you my favorite fighter, and that's not what makes you a fighter I look back on years later and fondly remember. Okay, it's the excitement, it's the drama, and by drama I mean in the cage. It's the warrior spirit that makes you stick with me, and I think that's true for most fans. And I think a lot of fans, are having some double think at the moment because, they clearly want the fighting nerds to do well because of how exciting they are, but then they freak out when they lose. And it's like, guys, just don't worry, because the reason you like them isn't actually because you thought they might be the best. It's because they're actually exciting, okay? But anyways, that's going to be explored more later on. But circling back to Huffy and to grappling and everything, thankfully for Gene Silva, this is not an issue, okay? His grappling looks quite good, both defensive and we didn't get to see him tested in every possible way, but both defensively and offensively, he looked very good against Bryce Mitchell. And honestly, there's just not many grapplers at featherweight ahead of him to fight. There's Evloev and there's Sterling. Sterling's an old man. I wouldn't worry, like that. That matchup won't probably happen anytime soon. Maybe if he loses, then possibly. But like if he loses, he's got other problems. But Silva, I wouldn't worry about Sterling. He won't be around long. And Evloev is actually in his way, but the UFC seems so hell-bent on denying him a title shot and denying him, certain opportunities. I would be very surprised if they paired him up with Gene Silva. So for all intents and purposes, Silva has already put the worst grapplers behind him in the rearview mirror, and he's done fine. So that doesn't mean he's going to beat Lopez, doesn't mean he's going to beat Volkanovski or Murphy or whoever, but the thing that derailed Hoofy, and the thing that really was worrying, because it did show there were levels. It showed there were levels in a way that Barajos lost to Imanov and that Prochaz's loss against Gary did not show. The other issues were exposed in those losses, but they weren't as bad as Huffy's loss, because Huffy really, really showed a lack of grappling in that fight. That was worrying. And if you were a fan of his, if you were hoping he was going to be a contender, if you were hoping he was going to be champion, like this is not good, okay? And, again, kind of spoiler alert for some vids I'm going to do later, but for me, it's not an issue. Like, I don't give a shit if he loses. I just hope they don't pair him up with guys who are going to do that to him over and over again, and just like, because the UFC can do that to guys. The UFC can see a weakness like that and be like, well, we're just going to keep throwing you in with that matchup, and you're going to either adapt and prove it's not a problem, or you're going to lose 3 in a row and get the fuck out of here. And hopefully they don't do that. Hopefully they give him a good action fight next, but we'll see what happens. But stay tuned.